I read an article online about you, and you were talking about over time that you've had to get used to not being quite as emotional from a business perspective as what you had. It's certainly something that I resonate with as well, particularly in an industry, in a business that you're very passionate about. That I've got carried away with the emotional side and probably not looked as much as about the logical side. So tell us a bit about your experience in that, and how, what are some of the things that you do when you are going into different opportunities to ensure that you get that balance right between, yeah, I think this is a great idea, I've got that gut feel, but also logically it's going to make sense.
Yeah. First off, there were a lot of decisions that I made in the past that were emotional, and they weren't business decisions early on. I'm opening this club where I went in and I raised a significant amount of money. I'm 26, 27 years old, I'm raising 5 million bucks. And, I think specific things back then were ego driven. It was like, oh, trying to make the best facility and the best equipment, and, overdoing things with the shake bar, and all these things that were just, they were really nice, but from a business standpoint didn't make sense. And it's funny because when I opened the club more than that 16 years ago, it became such a part of my identity. I actually used to think about what's going to happen when I don't have it anymore. And there was this fear that always ran through my head because I really felt like that I was so emotionally attached to it. And don't get it wrong. I mean, this is something that put me on the map, Dry 495 and then Dry 443. And it allowed me to connect with some incredible people, and allowed myself to get on a specific pedestal that I probably wouldn't have had if I didn't have the club. But I was fortunate enough to be able to exit from those facilities, doing it my way, and exiting in a way where I almost felt like I was stepping into something better. Not that I would ever disregard the fact of how important that was to me, or what a learning curve that was for me, but it was time to move on. And I really did it in a way where I was actually excited. There wasn't an ounce of like, I'm going to miss this place. I remember walking in there on the last day when everything was out of there, and just looking at it and kind of smiled, and just looking at the facility. It sounds corny, but just being like, thanks. Because those 15 years, they were hell. it was unbelievable. And I think someone like your buddy Jay Wright would allude to it also. Those 15 years, I mean, there were several months or years where I could turn around and say, wow, we were cruising along. There was always something going wrong with Manhattan real estate. There was, if the air conditioning wasn't exploding, the staff member was leaving. And if this member wasn't leaving, there was a blackout. And if there wasn't a blackout, there was Hurricane Sandy. And it was just on it. And then out of nowhere, Con Ed or Verizon has a shutdown, and then you're down power, or, just things. It just seemed like every week there was some piece of crap being thrown at you. And it really taught me patience, and it taught me to relax and say to myself, man, it's going to be okay. Because I want to say there was a period of time where I almost missed 37 payrolls. 37 payrolls. Like, that's significant. Like, my rent every year was $750,000. My overhead to break even was $2 million in one club. Like, I was a risk taker. Like, I jumped into this stuff not knowing how to swim, and I had to learn how to swim pretty quickly. And you know what? I did it for a long period of time, and I lived out the life of the lease. I couldn't have been any more proud. But if you told me 15 years ago that my lease was going to expire May 31st of 2020, and Cuomo was going to shut down gyms in the city on March 16th at 8 p.m., I mean, at that point, I just, I turned to my wife, and we came up with an incredible idea, and it literally erupted almost overnight. And then you were immediately transitioning into this new business model that suddenly you're looking at something that was so important to you, saying, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to have to deal with the landlord. I don't want to have to deal with this guy who's, I just paid 3 months for the life of the lease, and he's trying to file a lawsuit on me for stuff that I'm not even responsible for. Like, why do I want to be in bed with someone like this? So these are some really, these 15 years, I would never turn around and say, take that away from me. I wouldn't be here talking to you right now. I wouldn't be as successful as I am. I wouldn't have the contacts that I have, and I wouldn't be going on the trajectory that I'm going on right now. But let me tell you, there was many nights that I was going to bed just going, holy shit, I don't know if I'm going to have a business in the morning. And that's a scary feeling.
Do you think now going through that experience, or almost really facing your fear and going through it, it was because I've been there. We've been in business for 20 years and had many of those moments, and sometimes the fear of what it's going to be like is not as much as actually when you go through it. It's like, yeah, look, this is not as bad as I imagined, and yes, we've got ways to go through it. I'm just wondering, was that your experience? Because there's probably a lot of people that are in a very similar position at the moment, and they're like, damn, am I going to be able to hold on? So I'm just curious to see, what that moment was like when you knew, look, there's no way you're going to keep this going, and as you said before, your identity was attached to it, and what was that like?
Yeah, well, I mean, what's funny about it is that I did keep it going, right? Like every moment that I turned around and I was like, oh, this isn't like, how are we gonna, like, we need $100,000 in the next 24 hours. Where am I going to come up with that money? Or we're burning up, on average $100,000 a month for 12 straight months. Like, we're literally bleeding, and most people would have had to have jumped ship. And there was those emotional decisions that might've been a little bit dumb that forced us to hang on. But, the best advice someone, ever gave me was like, they were like, listen, man, they were like, as bad as you think this is, there are people going through a hell of a lot worse. And that, and whatever happens, you're going to be all right. Like, you're going to figure it out. Like, you might go through hell, you might lose your home, something might happen, but you're going to bounce back on your feet. And I think just going to bed at night, and I'm a pretty religious person, where I just said to myself, just trusting in the process, trusting in the man upstairs, just telling myself, listen, I can't predict the future. I can only do the best that I can. And I know taking that attitude really, it taught me a lot, because when I was younger, you get a bit apprehensive, right? Like, something bad starts happening and you're like, your heart's racing, and you start panicking. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And you literally learn how to be a man, and you literally learn how to handle those situations and take a deep breath and say, all right, this isn't good, but what can we do? What are our options? And then you start making business decisions. You start sitting down and you start really assessing things. And then maybe you got to make a few phone calls to people who may have had, experience in that area. And then you start thinking about a way out. And that's what I learned to do, underneath those circumstances. And again, every single successful person I've ever talked to, I've trained guys, like the Mike Bloomberg, or I've trained, Calvin Klein, or, the founders of major public companies, and, who are worth a lot of money. And everyone I've ever talked to said that they had to go through a really shitty period. And just hearing, some of these fashion designers that I know who have built up multi-billion-dollar companies turn to me and say, yeah, I was living underneath my desk for 2 years. And you start hearing stories like this, and no, it makes you feel better. It really does. Because then it says, oh my God, like, were you scared it wasn't going to go on there, like, every single day? Like, I didn't know, like, I wasn't seeing my kids. I was, and you hear these stories, and you say to yourself, oh my God, what am I going to do? Great story. One of my buddies, his name's Mark Menya. And I don't know if you've heard of him. He's one of the owners of the Anatomy gyms down in Miami. We just spoke at our buddy Luca Hosever's event in Seattle. And Mark got up on stage and started talking about when he was at the point with one of his clubs, and he sat with his investor in the car. It was like on a weekday night, and he's begging his investor to just let him keep the keys and let him keep the doors open. And the investor was like, oh, God, this is all aggravated. And, thank God he did. But Mark and I were talking about those moments where you were just like, you felt like your whole world was unraveling in front of you. And it's comforting to hear other stories, because you know what you have to do? You either have to make a business decision and say, all right, this is stupid, fold them up, or you got to put your head down and you got to run, and you got to work harder than you've ever worked in your life. And you've got to turn around and figure out ways to enhance the team and make business decisions. And you have to cut costs, and you have to do all these things that are, difficult things to do, firing people that were good friends of yours because you couldn't, support them anymore, and going through all that stuff. That's a part of what I do that I think most people on digital now, most people on social media, they don't see and they don't understand. They might see me put up a picture of me on the cover of Muscle and Fitness this month. Great. Fantastic. A lot of influencers out there, they're putting up programs of them, looking great and their abs and looking all strong, fantastic. I think as a coach, as a business owner, you got to go through a little bit of point of that hell. I think it's important. And if you can go through a whole life without going through it and you find success, then more power to you. I still think there's something you learn out of having to kind of pull yourself out of that quicksand. That is such a valuable lesson that you'll carry for the rest of your life.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.